Live from the Washington, D.C. area, it's the Inside Scoop, Emerald Planet. All the ecology news that our viewers want to know. Now, here's your host, Executive Director of the Emerald Planet, Dr. Sam Lee Hancock.
Hello, welcome to the Emerald Planet as we come to you from Washington, D.C. in the United States as we look around the globe, looking in those 144 different nations, looking for the 1,000 best practices, technology, services, and products that'll make a difference as we go through the 21st century. And as we add 2 billion new people by 2050, how we're going to be able to take care of them to provide all the basic infrastructure as well as the living environment within which these 2 billion new people will be born. And we have someone who's going to come on and talk about this with a very cute topic, and this really caught my attention. Cows save the planet. I'm not sure exactly how they do that, but Judith, she goes by Judy D. Schwartz, is an author, researcher, and an environmentalist, and she has her book, Cows Save the Planet, through the Chelsea Green Publishing. And she's coming in by Skype, and then sitting right beside us is our special guest, Sudheer, and he's actually been with us before. And so he's an old hand being here, but he's the outreach specialist for the Biodiversity for a Living Climate. And actually we had your group on several months ago, and he's part of the DC chapter. So Judy, welcome to the Emerald Planet.
Oh, thank you.
Glad to have you with us. And you're actually in a very beautiful area up there in Vermont, and you're going to tell us all about how cows save the planet, and what a great title for your book. But tell us a little bit about this publication, and why did you choose that as the topic and also as the title for your book?
All right, so Cows Save the Planet is it's a look at soil as a kind of crucible for our many environmental, economic, and social challenges, and for solutions. So it's kind of a soil's eye view of the crises that we face today.
Now, looking at the environment, of course, we're always talking about this balance between the water, the air, and the soil, and you specifically chose the soil, as you say, a soil's eye view of all of this. Why did you choose soil as the focus and versus, say, water and air?
Well, I can tell you that if anyone had told me a few years ago that I would be writing a book on soil, I would have laughed. But what happened was that I went to a conference and someone made a statement that simply would not let me go. And that was this, that over time, more CO2 has gone into the atmosphere from the soil compared to the burning of fossil fuels. Mm-hmm. And that just hit me over the head because I had never heard that. And I thought I knew something about the environment. And then taking it further, if this was indeed the case, well, it sounded kind of important because soil is all around us and maybe there's something we can do about it. So as I continued to explore, I learned that indeed this is true, and that the flip side of excess atmospheric CO2 is the loss of carbon in the soil. And by bringing carbon back into the soil, which is the basis, carbon in the soil is the basis of organic matter, then that makes bolsters fertility, biodiversity, and land's ability to hold water, which is significant in the face of droughts and floods. So from kind of just a little inkling of maybe soil is more important than it certainly had ever occurred to me, it seemed crucial, absolutely crucial to addressing the challenges that we face.
I was going to ask a question in just a minute, but let's follow up on this because, you know, with the melting of the glaciers and the exposure of the permafrost in places like Siberia, Alaska, you know, all around that Arctic belt, and even down in the southern climes down towards Antarctica, methane is now being, brought to the surface and released, and that's as poisonous or even more poisonous than CO2. So does that all fit into the research and your look at soils as far as not only the CO2 but also the methane and other gases that are being released into the environment?
Yeah, so all of these gases, they're very complicated means of exchange. Now, methane is certainly a problem. The source of most of the methane that is going into our atmosphere is not from cows, as we hear, but from from release when we're exploring natural gas and working with those energy systems, and also from wetlands, rice paddies, etc. So okay, I know people are thinking, but aren't cows the cause of methane? And this is what's really, really important to know, is that certainly cattle do release methane. That's part of their digestive process. However, there are in healthy soil many, many, many bacteria that actually consume methane. So when you have animals, including cattle, on healthy pasture, then the methane that they release is being consumed by those bacteria, so the cycle kind of evens out. If you have cattle in feedlots that are crammed together and their waste goes into lagoons, that is a problem. That's where we get that creates the ideal scenario for the production of methane, and there are none of these bacteria to be found. So when we hear that cows are bad environmentally, my reaction is that it's kind of cheap for us to blame animals for our failure to manage them properly. So it's all a matter of management.
Yeah. And I would agree with that. And also, too, as far as they're finding now in Africa, South America, and places like that, if they go back to the traditional methods of herding, Judy, is that they can actually go back and start increasing the grasslands, the trees coming back in, and actually start putting more water back in the soil. And quite honestly, they're still trying to figure out why that happens. But, through this, what they call the corral method, it's just fascinating what you're learning and what you're doing, and thank you for sharing this. Sudheer, why don't you ask the next question?
Sure.
Thank you.
Judy, so how do cows form part of the solution? What led you to call the book Cows Save the Planet?
Okay, so Cows Save the Planet the title is a nod to holistic livestock management. It's an approach to managing animals in a way that kind of kickstarts many biological processes. Sam, you referred to traditional livestock management. So this is based on theories by a fellow named Alan Savory, who developed this particular approach to animal management. And he had two core insights. One is that grasslands and grazing animals co-evolved, so that the land needs the animals in the same way that the animals need the land. And when we think about our natural systems, when we think about the savanna in Africa, we think about our own Great Plains, there were many, many millions of grazing animals, more than we could even imagine, continually traversing the landscape and having this biological effect on the landscape, largely because they were being managed by predators. So they weren't just staying in one place, which is where we do get many problems with livestock. Rather, they were continually fleeing the natural predators, be they wolves in the U.S., in North America, or lions and hyena in Africa. And of course, there are many other systems too. But so they were always moving. So they were leaving their waste, which added organic matter and thereby carbon. They were pressing in with their hooves decaying plant matter so that that could be incorporated into the soil rather than staying on top of the land, blocking new growth and oxidizing.
Yeah, this is something actually my father, going back many years, was doing many of these methods. We had a very large property, but it was quite hilly. And he was able to take land that was just fallow and within about 5 to 10 years turn it back into very productive grazing lands. And actually some of the fields came back into producing hay and in some cases even corn. And so it was just very interesting how all this is now coming back around. And thank you for sharing about this. But how do we raise awareness, or how is this work that you're doing, Judy, raising awareness of the connection between soil and climate, and specifically climate change?
Well, for many people, awareness an interest in soil comes from the food movement, from people being concerned about the quality of their food, because really food can only be as nutritious and healthful as the soil on which it is grown. Mm-hmm. So that's how many people come to this. But in the meantime, more and more people are also seeing the connection between soil and climate. And what's interesting is that when I was writing this book, it was about in 2012 that I was in the midst of putting it together. It felt like I was kind of alone out there, that I was talking to my sources, but I was really sitting here at this desk in Bennington thinking, oh my goodness, this is so significant. I really want to get the word out. And now there are numbers of organizations, such as Biodiversity for a Livable Climate, that Sudheer is part of, and Soil for Climate, and Kiss the Ground, the Carbon Underground, Regeneration International, the Soil Solutions from the Center for Food Safety. So many of these organizations that are really focusing on soil, because we can restore soil very, very quickly and have an incredible impact, and restore land so that it holds water. So that, I mean, I know of cases where people whose farms fared fine during really significant floods, whereas their neighbors really suffered tremendous losses because they had not been focusing on soil health.
Right. Judy, we've just about run out of time, so I'm going to go right to the very last question. What do you see for the impact of Cows Save the Planet, say, over the next 5, 10, 15 years? And we have to be quick. We got about 10 seconds.
Okay. I just hope that people's awareness of soil and its connection to climate, biodiversity, and floods and droughts continues to increase.
That's absolutely fantastic. This is Judith, Judy D. Schwartz, author, researcher, and environmentalist, and her publication we're talking about, Cows Save the Planet, Chelsea Green
There's more than just books at the library.
There's more than just books at the library.
Excuse me.
There's more than just books at the library.
Il n'y a plus que de livres à la bibliothèque.
Hello. You have a lot of great books here today. You know there's more than just books at the library.
I know.
There's more than just books at the library.
I don't want to be hooked to a machine.
I want all the medical treatment available to me.
I wouldn't want my family to have to make this decision.
My doctor knows what's best for me.
An advance directive is your life on your terms. Talk with your family. Decide what's right for you. Then put it in writing.
Documenting my wishes today means my family won't have to make heart-wrenching decisions later.
To learn more, visit www.putitinwriting.org.
1,200 American youth run away from their homes every day. The National Runaway Switchboard is here to help. 1-800-RUNAWAY. If you are a runaway, thinking about running away from home, or a parent or guardian concerned about issues facing your child, call us 24 hours a day. 1-800-RUNAWAY. In times of crisis, hope is just a phone call away. 1-800.
We're back to the Inside Scoop Emerald Planet. Here again, your host, Dr. Sam.
Hello and welcome to the Emerald Planet as we're looking around the globe for those 1,000 best practices, the technologies, services, products, and the processes, of course, as we move through the 21st century. And as we have maybe 9 billion people on the planet by 2050, possibly 12 to 13 billion by the end of this century, how are we going to take care of all these people to provide the food, the fuel, the fiber, but more than importantly than that, the actual water, because water is life. And if we don't have water, forget it. It's not a place that we can habitat, and we have to be somewhere else. And someone is saying that actually there may be more water out there than what we think. And this is actually very interesting research is being done by a number of research scientists all over the globe about how that we can actually increase the amount of water that's actually available more than what we ever thought. This is Judith, Judy D. Schwartz. She's an author, researcher, and environmentalist. And she has a book called Water in Plain Sight. Water in Plain Sight, Hope for a Thirsty World. This is St. Martin's Press. She's coming in by Skype. And then sitting right beside us is a good friend of ours that's been on Emerald Planet before, Sudheer Shukla, and he's an outreach specialist for biodiversity for Livable Climate, the DC chapter. And actually, he's being very modest. He works with the nationwide chapters, this whole self. So anyway, thank you for being here and highlighting that for DC. Sam. Glad to have you. As an environmentalist and author, researcher, Judy, I know you're coming in by Skype. Thank you for being with us. But this water in plain sight, hope for a thirsty world, how does that really improve knowledge and try to get us back on track as far as looking at all the biodiversity? I'm using that in a very loose term right now because we're focusing on water. And I know you're really a soils specialist and working in the movement of livestock, etc. But how does that really aid the knowledge as far as sustainable environment?
Well, so the book is a look at water, which is something that is very much on people's minds, particularly here in the U.S. Our consciousness was raised during the California drought. So this book is a look at water as it intersects with climate, biodiversity, peace and conflict, and food security, and how understanding how water works, how it moves across the landscape and through the atmosphere, that will help us address these many challenges that you've also referred to.
I tell you, that's incredible. That's a very wide brush to be able to paint and try to figure out the intersect of all that, Judy, and I admire your audacity to actually try to do that. Why did you choose a book about water? We know that you've done one about soils, how cows save the planet, very important work, and now you're moving into water. So why focus just on water? And the other areas as far as air, as soils, is almost just like a support staff for the water topic.
So when I wrote the book on soil, there was a chapter on water. And there was so much that got me very, very excited. And one thing in particular was this, that when we hear about the connection between climate change and water, what we hear goes in one direction. We hear that climate change will put added stress on water sources throughout the world. And of course, that is a real concern and very important. But what we don't hear about is water's effect on climate. And that's where I was completely blown away with my research, because you know, as one of my sources, a fellow from Australia named Walter Jenna, a soil microbiologist, as he put it, that more than 90% of the collective phenomena that we call climate is driven by water-based processes. So I wanted to look at those processes, and I wanted to understand how water worked. You know, sometimes we think about water as a noun, as though it were this kind of static resource, and I get some and you get some, and we divide it up and maybe fight about it, or maybe not, hopefully not, but wanted to look at water as in action, because that's when it gets really exciting, and we can work with the water cycle to address climate change, and that's really, really exciting and hopeful.
Yeah, that's very exciting. Of course, as we know, many of the wars that are going on are either internal conflicts or extraterritorial conflicts or over water. It's just like a lot of what's going on in the Middle East between Palestine and Israel, Jordan, and those areas. Even the wars in Syria and Iraq many times can be the same thing as far as what's going on with water. And of course, across the Horn of Africa is the same thing as well. So, Sudheer, I think Judy is coming in very nicely by Skype, so your question.
All right. Judy, I think so part of what you're saying is that we've been ignoring water, perhaps our most important natural resource. Given that water is life, why do you think that's true?
Well, I think that we've been taking water for granted, certainly here in this country. And I think, you know, when Sam mentioned the prospect of conflict and how lack of water relates to conflict, again, I think it relates to perhaps we could call it lack of water literacy, because when we talk about water and drought and those challenges, we tend to focus on what comes down from the sky, and we don't look at water. The truth is that we can't really address our water challenges without also looking at land. And so in terms of water is life, it's not water in isolation, it's water in relation to land and to plants and to animals and all of those dynamics.
Yeah, that's the one thing about transpiration. All of us learned that in our the various science classes when we were in high school and all that. But as soon as we left, we quickly forgot about how important that is. And that really it's more than just the water cycle, it's the life cycle here on the planet. And so that's critically important.
And the energy cycle.
Absolutely. Absolutely. How is water and biodiversity connected, Judy?
Okay, so that in my research turned out to be much more nuanced and interesting than I really had originally thought. Okay, so it certainly makes sense that if you have a healthy water cycle, if the water is working well in a particular area, you have plenty, then that promotes biodiversity, that supports more life forms. Okay, that certainly makes sense. But also, biodiversity supports the water cycle, and that's when it got really interesting. So in many places where we're having problems with water, what's happened is that we have a simplified water cycle, so that water moves too fast, that we've lost plant cover, so water isn't held. We've lost the carbon in the soil, so again, water isn't held on the landscape. And when you have a lot of biodiversity, such as, for example, a good population of beaver, then those beavers are helping to manage the water cycle and slow down water. And then other species such as earthworms and dung beetles, all the creatures that move through the soil are creating paths for air and water. And so that's keeping water on the landscape.
Well, looking at this whole topic of water, this is one of the things that they're learning, particularly in the Middle East, between Palestine, Israel, and Jordan, how that this water literacy, I'm glad you brought that up because that's something they're working on with the schools in those areas. And so all of a sudden they're pairing up, you know, Palestinian, Jordanian, and Israeli schools. They're bringing together the faculty and staff, even the parents out of the communities to work with the students and actually to catch the water and water harvesting and then growing their own vegetables and all that. And it's amazing how these very practical things which impact the local community, when you involve the entire community and the decision makers, all of a sudden water takes on a new emphasis and also the soil itself. Looking at what makes you actually hopeful that we can address the biodiversity, but also expanding the sources of water?
Well, you just said one very important thing. By using very, very practical methods, we can hold water. Our water supply expands mainly because that water is no longer wasted. Even in a dry place like Southern California, even on in the years with the least amount of rainfall, several thousand gallons of water per person is wasted. So by using methods such as water harvesting, by keeping ground covered with plants, because plants manage water through transpiration, and also the plants, by capturing carbon, they're building the soil. Plants build soil. So by keeping land covered, we're able to hold more water. And for every 1% increase in soil organic carbon, which is what one does through regenerative practices, that means 20,000 gallons of water per acre, an additional 20,000 gallons of water per acre that can be held on the land. So there are many things that we can do. And just as another quick example, I was in the Chihuahua Desert in far west Texas and stayed with a family that gets all of their water from condensation, from dew. And there are people I know that call dew the most important water in the system because it is the most dependable. So by understanding how water works and by applying some simple methods that derive from our water literacy, we can really make a huge difference.
Well, we're about ready to run out of time. So looking at the book that you have, Water in Plain Sight, Hope for a Thirsty World, what do you see for its impact and also the lessons for policymakers specifically, but also ordinary citizens around the globe as we look at more water sources? And we have to be quick. We've got about 20 seconds.
Sure. I think understanding how all of these challenges intersect, as do the solutions. That by working with the water cycle, you're also helping bring back to balance the carbon cycle and the energy cycle.
And also, too, is the biodiversity in the soil itself, because there's billions of organisms in the soil, and a lot of which we don't even know what they are and what they're doing and all of that. But this is Judith, Judy D. Schwartz, author, researcher, environmentalist. Her book, Water in Plain Sight, Hope for a Thirsty World. Thank you for being with us as we create the Emerald Planet.
Some dreams are universal. Dreams that inspire us. Multiple sclerosis is a devastating disease that changes lives forever. The National MS Society does more for people with MS than any organization in the world. But we can't do it alone. To get involved, visit us online at nationalmssociety.org or call 1-800-FIGHT-MS. This is why we're here. Because nobody dreams of having multiple sclerosis.
What's wrong with this picture? Half of young Americans can't locate economic powers like Japan and India. 20% can't even find the Pacific Ocean. Without geography, our children aren't ready for the world. Geography is everywhere. It's incredible creatures, rhythm, fashion, flavor. It's economics and politics. It's change. Understanding connections between people and places is critical in the 21st century. That's why we created mywonderfulworld.org. Go there now for your free parent and teacher action kits and give our kids the power of global knowledge. Because kids who understand our world today can succeed in it tomorrow.
I'm having a hard time hearing you with all this other stuff going on.
We're back to the Inside Scoop Emerald Planet. Here again, your host, Dr. Sam.
To the Emerald Planet as we come to you from Washington, D.C. in the United States on a week-by-week basis as we're looking around the globe in 144 different nations looking for what we call the best of the best practices, the best technologies, the best products, and also the best services that are out there that can address climate change as well as how do we improve the environment, not only just for the water but also the soil and the air. And we have someone that's coming on who's actually working on all these things and doing it from the land up. This is Sally Dodge. She's a member, a board of directors, and a manager for the Iroquois Valley Farms in Northeast United States. She's coming in by Skype. And sitting right beside us is our good friend who's been on Emerald Planet before, which is Sudheer Shukla. He is the outreach specialist for what's called Biodiversity for a Livable Climate. That's a great title that you have there. And welcome back to be with us. Yes, you can. You're doing good work. Sally, welcome.
Thank you very much, Sam. I'm happy to be here.
We're glad to have you. You're coming all the way from Vermont in a very beautiful area up there, and so welcome to be with us by Skype. But tell our domestic international viewers a little bit about your work as far as the Iroquois Valley Farms, and then why is the impact so important to the Northeast United States and specifically to local communities?
Well, I got to Iroquois Valley Farms through a career of farming and farm support work that I've been doing in Vermont since the 70s. I've raised all kinds of animals, and then I got to where I really needed to help with the marketing of farm products. And so from there, I worked with farm marketing in terms of developing markets to support diversified farmers. It was tough for New England small farmers to get meat, for instance, sold because the whole market had moved to much larger corporations like Iowa beef producers and things like that. So we started by really supporting farmers markets and winter farmers markets. I started a program called Taste of Vermont, where I put together chefs and restaurants in a number of events, and that took off and was really the pioneer of the locally grown foods movement. So my work has been in food as well as farming, and I'm really happy to say that a lot of the work has led to situations where the state has stepped in and created the Farm Fresh Network, which is a permanent program between chefs and farmers. And then 5 years ago, the state started a program called the Farm to Plate Initiative, and it's a real economic driver within the state of Vermont. The next thing that we came to was to realize that we needed to get more farmers on the land, and that's very tricky. Farmers live in a different economic situation than many other people, and we needed real investment capital to help farmers with getting access to land.
Yeah, that's something that's really tricky as, 80% of the United States population now live in urban areas. We think of the United States as wide open spaces and, you know, many farmers, agriculturalists, ranchers, foresters, and all that. But more and more people are really concentrating in urban areas. So how are you able to, through the work that you're doing, Iroquois Valley Farms, to try to reverse that trend and get people from the city, say, back into the countryside where there may be farms available as people retire or pass on to younger family members, but they don't want to be in any kind of agricultural work?
Well, one of the things I have to say is Iroquois Valley Farms considers ourselves a food and farmland company. And so food and the quality of food is very, very important to us and to our investors. We're an organic farmland company, and any land that we buy to lease to farmers must be farmed organically. And we certainly help those farmers who go on to conventional lands through the transition process to become organic. Now, in response to your question about urban people, well, our investors, a lot of them are urban people who are trying to make an impact with their investment dollars. And they are an amazing, socially responsible, committed group of people who are investing in our company, and then they're really our partners, and we take the money that they've invested and we invest it in farmland, which we then rent to our organic farmers. So it's a food revolution as well as a land revolution for us, and we're doing it one farm at a time. It's infinitely scalable. Right now we have 34 farms, and they range from Montana to Maine, and we have about 230 investors, and we're hoping that, you know, as we get more investors, we'll have more land and just keep moving it right along. And it's picking up. Other companies now want to do that, and there are many, many people who want to invest their money with impact so that they can really see their money doing some good.
Well, I like that inflection in your voice. Invest with impact. I like your energy, so that's absolutely fantastic. Sudheer, you have a question?
Yeah, Sally. So what are some of the environmental and economic impacts in local communities that you've seen from the work you're doing at Iroquois Valley Farms?
Well, I have to keep coming back to the food revolution, because that's what we're really concentrating on, is food, and organic food, and food that then is grown in such a way that the soil remains healthy and that the soil is able to retain the carbon that's needed to stay in the soil in order to begin combating climate change. Wait a second, I'm just having a little trouble with the back talk here. So the food revolution is really the impact of what we're doing, and our investors are interested in health. I'm having trouble here with the connection.
Sally, can you hear me? Sudheer, let's move on while the technicians take care of that. Looking at the work you're doing as far as biodiversity for a livable climate, I mean, this has a mighty title, but at the same time, it's doing real work. Tell us a little bit about that work.
Well,
can we go back to the question, Sudheer?
We're going to continue here for just a minute, then we'll be right back. We'll let the engineers take care of that.
So we're trying to get the word out about the potential for practices that draw carbon into soil through photosynthesis as another way of addressing climate change beyond reducing emissions, which is also crucial.
Mm-hmm. So that's very important.
Regenerative, you know, a lot of that is agricultural practices, so-called regenerative agriculture.
Yeah, agriculture.
Both on cropland and grasslands.
Sally, let's carry on as far as, because time is marching on here. And you were talking about this, and I just want to do a bridge question into this link between agriculture and climate change. How do you think that the work that you're doing as far as Iroquois Valley Farms is actually closing that gap, so that the work that you're doing is starting to address this whole thing as far as severe or even violent climate change? Okay, Sudheer, we're going to move right along. Going back to your organization, tell us a little bit about the history of the biodiversity for a livable climate.
Well, we started out in the Boston area, and our first major conference was in November of 2014 called Restoring Ecosystems to Reverse Global Warming. And that's been our idea, looking at various methods to reverse global warming, not just get to zero emissions, but actually, turn back to get a healthy climate rather than just a stable climate, of zero emissions. And that's the conversation we're trying to have among the general public and climate organizations, to include regenerative agriculture and eco-restoration as another tool to combat climate change.
And this is what Sally Dodge is doing as far as Iroquois Valley Farms, and very important work. Sally, I think you're back with us now. Can you hear us? I think we're still losing Sally. Going back on to, let's take the example of what she's doing, because you're familiar with some of the work as far as Iroquois Valley Farms. How does that fit into what you're doing as far as this biodiversity for a livable climate?
Well, a lot of what we do is telling the stories of people who are doing this work, and looking at people like Sally Dodge, and then more generally, Alan Savory, Joel Salatin, and other farmers who are doing this work and getting fantastic results in terms of building soil carbon, and increasing the nutrient density in their soil, the soil health. We're trying to tell their stories as examples of what's possible in terms of practices that can both generate food in a way that's builds biodiversity on the farmland and enhances the ecosystem of the farmland, but also to address climate change by drawing carbon from the atmosphere into the soil.
Now, the whole thing about this, as far as the biodiversity, we think of that as, we have cattle, we have crops, we have all this thing going on the surface, but the real biodiversity is what's going on in the soil.
Right.
And there's just billions of organisms there, and actually we don't even have any idea about the total amount and what some of them even are, because each time they do more and more research, they find more organisms within the soil. So looking at the biodiversity, how can farmers such as a Sally Dodge, and we're just absolutely run out of time, I was going to ask, how can they increase biodiversity? And we'll go out on that question. And you got to be quick.
Well, basically it all goes together. Taking care of the soil health increases biodiversity as well as soil carbon. So it all, water, biodiversity, carbon, they all come together.
All fits together. Well, thank you very much. We had Sally Dodge, who is a member, board of directors, and manager for Iroquois Valley Farms, Northeast United States, up in Vermont. She was coming in by Skype before we had technical difficulties. And then we had right beside us is Sudheer, who is here with Biodiversity for a Livable Climate as we create the Emerald Planet.
I helped turn my child's public school into a whole new kind of school. One with a curriculum that really motivates kids. One that has extended hours, 6 days a week, year-round. With loads of academic, cultural, and recreational activities. One that has support services like medical and dental right there. A school where parents' involvement is encouraged. Where teachers have more time to teach. And students are excited about learning. There's just one problem. My child doesn't ever want to come home. You can help turn your school into a community school for excellence. Find out how. Call 1-877-LOVE-TO-LEARN.
It's coming. Right to your neighborhood. And when it does, you may be surprised. It's your Social Security statement of your benefits, and it's going to help you plan your financial future. Your benefit statement will tell you how much Social Security you're eligible to receive and when you'll get it. Then you'll know how much you need to save for retirement, because that's coming too. The future is in your hands. Choose to save.
The toxic fumes from this meth lab are seeping into Jamie's sinus cavity. Ammonia vapors invade her throat. Toxic gases fill her lungs. Jamie's body is deteriorating. And she doesn't even know it.
Jamie, dinner.
So, who has the drug problem now? Find out how meth affects you at drugfree.org/.
We're back to the Inside Scoop Emerald Planet. Here again, your host, Dr. Sam.
Hello and welcome to the Emerald Planet as we come to you on a week-to-week basis from Washington, D.C. in the United States. We're looking around the globe in 144 different nations, looking for those 1,000 best practices, technologies, services, products, and the processes that are making a difference as we move through the 21st century. I'm Dr. Sam Hancock, the President and Executive Director of Emerald Planet, and also we have the Emerald Planet TV, and we have 4 shows a week with a unified theme and a 1-hour program. And we have a gentleman coming in that's going to be sharing with us about regenerative agriculture and about how to improve not only the soil but also the air and water quality by good and in many ways very old ancient techniques that are being rediscovered and reapplied by agriculturalists such as Jesse McDougall, who is the owner of Studio Hill LLC, coming from Vermont. And our special guest sitting right beside me is the Skype backup is our good friend Sudheer Shukla, and he is the outreach specialist and for the chapter of the Biodiversity for a Livable Climate. And they need to be paying you for the length of your title there, Sudheer. And we're always glad to have you with us. Jesse, welcome to the Emerald Planet TV.
Well, thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here.
We're honored to have you. I hear that you're doing great work up there, and a lot of people are excited about the work that you're doing and the support that you're actually giving not only to good agricultural practices, but actually to be an example of how to hopefully reverse or remediate some of the climate change. So tell us a little bit about Studio Hill LLC. It sounds like something that would be in a studio apartment in downtown New York City instead of up in the countryside in Vermont.
It's all marketing, right? So
it's all about it.
Studio Hill is a pasture-based meat operation that my wife and I operate on her family's 4th generation farm here in Shaftesbury, Vermont. We raise turkey, lamb, chicken, pork on pasture using the holistic management practices that you heard your previous guest speak about.
Well, looking at all that, tell us a little bit about your background. I don't know whether you actually grew up on a farm, you're farming stock yourself. I came off of a ranch and a farm. It's kind of a dual purpose land. And yes or no is why are you actually farming in today's world, which is over 80% industrial? And also too, it's, farming is very hard, difficult work, and it really is work. So when people ask me if I'm working hard, I say anything beyond the farm is easy. So tell us about something of the work that you're doing.
Well, I didn't grow up farming. I grew up in a mountain town in New Hampshire where there was no agricultural history or tradition. Everything I ate growing up came out of a drive-through window or through a frozen pizza box. And I grew up with no sense of nutrition or eating well, or let alone soil or how nutrition played a role, or I should say how soil health played a role in nutrition. And the short answer is I fell in love with a girl whose family had a farm. And in 2000, the woman there that you're showing holding the guitar, nope, I'm sorry, the woman on the horse there who had been running the farm for 40 years, passed away of brain cancer. She was only 56 years old. And my wife and I came in. She was the next generation of the farm, she and her sister. And my wife and I came in to see if we could help. And the first decision we made, being so scared of the cancer, was we're going to stop spraying anything and everything on the farm immediately. And of course, we couldn't link that directly to the cancer, but the fear was real enough that we said, that's it. And the farm for the previous 30 years or so had been managed, as most of the farms in our area are managed, in a conventional chemical corn and hay rotation. And we naively thought that if we stop spraying the NPK fertilizers and the pesticides and the herbicides and just let nature do its thing, that the lush green fields that we knew that had been there would remain lush green fields. And as soon as we stopped spraying, we learned quite differently. The truth about the health of the soil was revealed as soon as we stopped propping it up with chemicals. And the fields collapsed. Essentially, that field you're looking at there with the green stripe down the middle was you could walk from one end to the other without stepping on a blade of grass. The soils were devoid of organic matter because they'd been tilled so heavily. They'd been sprayed with pesticides and herbicides to a point where they couldn't support life anymore. So that sent us into a winter of panic, and we didn't want to be the generation that lost the farm. And that's when we came across the work of Alan Savory and what he was doing in Africa. Judith Schwartz's books, Courtney White's books, Jeff Lowenfels, and all these pioneers in the regenerative agriculture field. And we decided to test it out. We started with chickens and moved them in a Joel Salatin style mobile chicken coop where the birds are right on the grass, and we moved them through the pasture twice a day, so they're only on a patch of grass for 12 hours. And we found that right behind the day behind the chickens, the grass looked decimated, and we thought, we're totally hosed. This is not going to work. And a week later, we saw sprouts of new growth, and a month later, we saw that green mohawk photo that you see of this strip of tall, lush green grass coming through down the middle of the field where there had been nothing but sandy, dead soil. And so then we doubled down with more chickens, more turkeys, and then we added sheep, and now we're able to regenerate 20 acres at a time every year. And the fields are back up to, very nearly back up to production at the levels that we were with chemical agriculture. We are producing more nutritious forage and food because the soil is healthy and active, and what we're doing is we're creating a regenerative production model. So the more that we do produce, the more we can produce, and the more we do, sorry. So what we have is an economic model that ties in with the production model. So the more we produce, the more we can produce, because the fields are improving, the forage is improving, and the more animals the land can hold. So the more animals we can raise again. So it's two positive feedback loops, and one ecological and one economic, and where they intersect is the number of animals we can raise. So that's where we are now. We have a pasture-based system where the sheep precede the poultry, and we're just kind of working our numbers up as we sell more food to the local community and urban markets.
Jesse, looking at this photograph here, we've come through. I'm going to actually go back on a few of these, so this really, we can hit these themes that you were sharing with us. But getting to this photograph right here, tell us what we're seeing here and what is the regenerative aspects. You covered some of that, you know, have the sheep and the dung and all those other kinds of things, but how does all this really fit together?
Well, regenerative agriculture, I think, is the practice of raising food, fuel, or fiber in a way that restores the natural cycles to the land. So before, you know, we have a beautiful hilltop farm with 80 acres of field, and those fields were maintained by animals for tens of thousands of years. The reason that they stayed open as fields and didn't become forests is because we had sheep and deer and you know, birds in this area that would come into a field, eat it down, trample the grass, fertilize the grass, and then move off and only return when the reward made the risk worth it. So, you know, that was true up until about, in our area, maybe 100 years ago. And when the highways came in and the housing developments came in, those animals were either moved off the land or hunted or, you know, retreated to the forest. So what we're doing in that photo that you see is we are returning the animals to the land and restoring the missing part of this nutrient cycle. So the grazers need the grass, and the grass needs the grazers, because the grass evolved over 220 million years to thrive in the environment where it was managed by animals. And so what we're doing is increasing our production by mimicking the conditions under which the grass evolved to thrive. And that means, by the way, we get to stop paying for expensive inputs like fertilizer and pesticides and the tillage, and we get to replace that with the work that the chemical did with the work the animals do and their revenue stream. So it was an immediate swing in terms of financial outlook for the farm as well.
Yeah, this is really beautiful slides. We're absolutely going to be running out of time here in just a minute. I'm going to put this up. Just talk us through this. We're about out of time, but show us the regenerative nature using this one slide. And then the last question as part of that whole thing, Jesse, is where do you see your operations, but other farmers coming in, you know, like Sally Dodge with Iroquois Valley Farms and many others that are going to be involved in this, and you have just about 1 minute to do all of that. So
great.
You're on a roll, buddies. Just stay there.
Okay, great. Thank you. The slide you're looking at here is the same ground year over year. What we did was in 2013, and this is the spring of 2013. In the fall of 2012, we had reseeded that field to hay, and this is what came up in the spring. You can see that we have moss invading. There's no grass to speak of. Without seeding, without tilling, without fertilizing, we brought in the animals onto the field and mob grazed them through the field, and that's what came up in 2014. We did it again, and this is what we had in 2015, and this year the fields are even better. In the future, I'm hoping that we can serve as an example that this stuff works and it is ecologically and economically profitable.
Jesse, thank you very much. We ran out of time. This is Jesse McDougall. He is the owner, Studio Hill, LLC. We had our good buddy Sudheer sitting right beside us. Thank you for being with us on the Emerald Planet as we look around the globe and 144 nations as we create the Emerald Planet.